Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you are please requested to limit movement during the lecture, as this is a solemn gathering. And inaugural lectures in the University of Ibadan are very significant to our reputation, particularly in the pursuance of excellence in our day-to-day activities. We will therefore appreciate your cooperation by observing a solemn atmosphere throughout this lecture. You may wish to put your phones on silent mode, and let me reiterate that movement should be restricted during the lecture. The Vice Chancellor of our university, Professor Kayode O. Adebowale, MNI FAS, deeply appreciates your presence at this lecture. Thank you, and you're most welcome. May I request that we move forward? If there are vacant seats in front of you, kindly move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, may I request one more time that we fill vacant seats in front of us, so that those coming late won't disrupt the lecture in a bid to move forward. So kindly, ushers are to please note, do not allow anybody to walk in the middle aisle during the lecture. Can you please rise as the academic procession files in?
Vice Chancellor Administration, Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, Deputy Vice Chancellor Research, Innovation and Strategic Partnerships, the Registrar, the Bursar, University Librarian, Provost of the College of Medicine, Provost of the Postgraduate College, the Dean of the Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources, the Deans of other faculties and of students, Directors of institutes and centers, Heads of departments, the 12th Vice Chancellor of this university, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The 588th University of Ibadan Inaugural Lecture will be delivered this evening by Professor Abosede Omonona of the Department of Wildlife and Ecotourism Management on behalf of the Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources. Professor Abosede Omonona was born on Sunday, 22 February 1970, to the family of Pa Jacob Olaniyi Olaniyan and Mrs. Deborah Adeoti Ejide Olaniyi Olaniyan, both of blessed memory, from Ile Alapa, Oketara, in Ogbomoso South local government area of Oyo State. She had a primary school education at Northwest 5 Baptist Primary School at Omitowoju, Ibadan, from 1976 to 1982, and was appointed as the punctuality prefect in her final year. She proceeded to Emmanuel College High School, Orita UI, for her secondary school education from 1982 to 1987. Professor Abosede Omonona was the girl's senior prefect in her final year, and she emerged as the best graduating student, as well as the valedictorian for her set. She gained admission to the University of Ibadan in 1987 to study veterinary medicine. After the successful completion of her program from the Veterinary Medicine School, she did her mandatory National Youth Service Corps program in Kano State with the defunct Nigerian Agricultural Cooperative Bank from 1994 to 1995. Professor Abosede Omonona returned to the University of Ibadan for her postgraduate studies in the Department of Veterinary Medicine from 1995 to 1997. She joined the defunct Department of Wildlife and Fishery Management in September 1998 as lecturer grade 2, and thereafter registered for a PhD program in wildlife management with a special focus on zoonotic helminths at the Wildlife Domestic Animal Human Interface at the defunct Yankari National Park, now Yankari Game Reserve. She is a fellow of the College of Veterinary Surgeons of Nigeria and also a resource person under the same college. Professor Abosede Omonona was promoted to the rank of professor in October 2015. To date, she has successfully supervised students' projects at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. In number, 60 bachelors of science, 2 postgraduate diplomas, 25 masters of science, and 6 PhD students. She has over 100 publications to her credit, including journal articles that is published in reputable national and international outlets. She has also published 4 books. 1. Principles of Zoo Management in Nigeria. 2. Ecotourism, Implications on Human and Wildlife Health. 3. Some indirect indices of population census of wild animals, field guide. And 4. Indirect indices of population census of wild animals. And 4. insights into pests and diseases of wildlife. These books have been found very useful across the country by colleagues in the same field of study for training both students and for research purposes. Professor Abosede Omonona is a member of some learned societies such as the Nigerian Veterinary Medical Association, the Wildlife Society of Nigeria, Wildlife Diseases Association, among others. She has served the University of Ibadan in various capacities. These include undergraduate coordinator for the Department of Wildlife and Ecotourism Management from 2012 to 2013, Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources representative on the faculty board of the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and that of Faculty of Education at different periods of times, Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources representative on the Senate Curriculum Review Committee from 2019 to 2024. Professor and Head, Department of Wildlife and Ecotourism Management from August 1, 2020 to July 31, 2024. During the period of her headship of the department, she led the department to institute insightful collaboration with the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. She also led the department in the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding with the African Nature Investors, which has afforded lecturers and students of the department access to state-of-the-art equipment owned by the African Nature Investors and other resources to execute research work in Okomu National Park and other national parks in Nigeria where African nature investors have their sphere of influence. Professor Abosede Omonona is the visionary of the University of Ibadan Biodiversity Conservation Club. She has also initiated the observance of the annual World Wildlife Day celebration when she was the head of department in the year 2020 and leveraged on it to create awareness about the academic programs of the department to students and other teachers from over 40 schools, both primary and secondary within Ibadan and environment. Also, through her initiative, the department also engaged in connecting town with the gown through the series of annual guest lectures that was held during her tenure. Outside the University of Ibadan, she has served as assessor for promotion of colleagues and from other institutions such as the Forestry Research Institute of Nigeria, the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, the University of Benin, among others. Professor Omonona co-supervised research studies under the West African Biodiversity and Low Emissions Development, a USAID-funded project implemented by Tetra Tech with another researcher, Antonio Galilea Jimenez, from the University of Andalusia, Spain, from 2024 to 2025. Professor Omonona is a recipient of various grants, among which are the University of Ibadan Senate Research Grant from the year 2000 to 2001, University of Ibadan Conference Travel Grant in 2009, the University of Ibadan Research Foundation Grant, UIRF, in 2014. Professor Abosede Omonona, apart from being the first female head of department, is the first female professor in the Department of Wildlife and Ecotourism Management of this university. Thus, she became the first female professor of wildlife management in Nigeria and the first female professor of wildlife diseases management in West Africa. Professor Abosede Omonona is happily married to Professor Bolarin Titus Omonona of the Department of Agricultural Economics of this university. And the marriage is blessed with God-fearing children. Eboluwa Ayoluwamide Josephine, Oluwamayokun Victor, Olaoluwamide, and Oluwatobiloba Emmanuel Oluwagbemiga. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I now invite Professor Abosede Olayemi Omonona to deliver her lecture, which is titled Footprints on Tracks, Echoes from the Wild. Professor Omonona.
The Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellor Administration, Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, Deputy Vice Chancellor Research, Innovation and Strategic Partnerships, Registrar, Bossa, University Librarian, Provost of the College of Medicine and of the Postgraduate College, Dean of the Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources, Deans of other faculties and of students, Directors of institutes, centers, gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. For I proclaim the name of the Lord, I ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are just. A God of faithfulness and without injustice, righteous and upright is he. There are many devices in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. I am most grateful to my God, my creator, the lifter up of my head, and the lover of my soul, for the grace he has given me to stand before you today, the 31st day of July 2025, to deliver the 588th edition of the inaugural lecture series in the annals of this great university. I appreciate the Vice Chancellor and the Dean of the Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources for this honor accorded me to present this lecture. This is the 13th inaugural lecture to be given from the Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources since its creation, and Professor I.A. Ayodele, titled Tourism, Gateway to Good Health and Good Life. The second was delivered on the 5th of December 2019 by Professor J. Lamid, titled Wildlife, Not Wildlife, Custodian of the Environment. Interestingly, the title of Professor J. Lamid's lecture seems to remind me of the fact that God indeed answered my prayer about my choice of career and the lifestyle I prayed for. Introduction. It was few months to the time I was to obtain JAMB's UMA form when a family friend, Brother Oluwole Taiwo of blessed memory, visited our house. When he asked what I would like to study in the university, I could not come up with a specific answer. So he proposed that I should consider pharmacy, and he volunteered to pay for the JAMB's UMA form. I applied for pharmacy as my first choice, but could not secure the admission because my score was lower than the cutoff mark set for pharmacy in 1987 by the University of Ibadan. I changed to veterinary medicine with the intention to cross to human medicine after my first year. At the end of my first year in the university, I had to stay back in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine for some reasons. But by my third year, I was already restless and wished I had opted for computer science that I was offered but rejected. By the time I graduated from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, I was already eyeing banking industry or pharmaceutical industry because of the remuneration that my brother, who was working with a merchant bank, and some of my friends were earning then. So I decided to influence my national youth course posting to serve with the bank. Vice Chancellor, sir, I graduated from the University of Ibadan pursuing a soft life. How I ended up pursuing a PhD in wildlife management is only known to God. Immediately after my first degree in veterinary medicine, my 1-year national youth service course posting was influenced to serve with the defunct Nigerian Agricultural Cooperative Bank, Kano State branch, with the intention of working in the banking sector. But after the completion of the 1-year NYC program, several attempts were made to secure a job at the NACB, but all to no avail. I had to return for my postgraduate program at the Department of Veterinary Medicine, University of Ibadan, for master's degree in veterinary science. Upon the completion of my MVSc, my undergraduate project supervisor, Dr. A.K. Olaifa, informed me about the vacancy for an academic position in fish and wildlife diseases at the defunct Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Management, University of Ibadan. I submitted the first application in 1997, but it was not considered. Then I reapplied in 1998 and was eventually appointed in September 1998 as a lecturer grade 2. As much as I tried to pursue what I thought would provide me with the soft life I craved, none of my plans or permutations seemed to yield the desired results. Meanwhile, I kept praying, working, and devising my own way. God shepherding me in the way he already carved for me. There were different times in my life that I felt I was not where I should be, but God showed me mercy and gave me signs to prove to me that I am indeed where I should be. One of such is the meeting of my loving husband in the 4th Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry. God directly introduced us to each other without the involvement of any man. That is not to say that everything ran smoothly without challenges. But as the word of God says, if God be for us, who can be against us? In all, I give glory to the Most High God who always causes us to triumph. My research career. Immediately after I joined the defunct Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Management, I registered for my PhD program. But it was not until after a futile attempt to delve into virology that I switched to study zoonotic hermits at Wildlife Domestic Animal Human Interface in and around the then Yankari National Park, now a game reserve. Who would have thought that someone craving for soft life would start work by carrying fecal samples of humans, domestic and wild animals like Hagbeko, all the way from the northern part of the country to the southwest. I did carry Igbe. I became Agbebe for 3 consecutive years, but just because I wanted to acquire PhD. Now, wow. My PhD work exposed me to the application of ecological tools to gather data needed for my thesis. I was enthralled by the use of indirect indices to ascertain the identities of most of the samples that I gathered for my research work. Many years later, this enthrallment metamorphosed into a book titled Field Guide, Some Indirect Indices of Population Census of Wild Animals, which I published as a reference material both for students and faculty, Omonona 2024. I must admit, working in the field is both exciting and rewarding, though it demands a great deal of time and energy. One unforgettable experience was my first day in the forest of Yankari National Park, accompanied by the rangers and my colleague, then Dr. now Professor G. Lamid. Caught up in an engaging discussion, we failed to recall the coordinates of our starting point. Consequently, when we decided to return to the camp base about 2 hours later, we found ourselves lost. We wandered in circles for nearly an hour before we finally found our way back. When this happened, I actually thought the rangers intentionally put me through that baptism of fire to test my strength and see if I would break down. But I survived the rigors. The entire experience seemed like Irekerido Ninu Bolodumari. As we climbed hills, we descended to valleys, what my late mother would have called Bosikoto Bosigegele. It got to a point that Oluwani Olushagotomi, the Lord is my shepherd, became my mantra. I can still remember our trip to Walakero Enclave vividly. Aside working on the pathogens of wildlife in both in situ and ex situ conservation areas, my research field also spans environmental contaminants in national parks and other protected areas, livelihood of wildlife traders, drivers of bushmeat hunting, and perception of zoonosis among wildlife hunters and traders. Historical review. Over the past few decades, the study of wildlife health and diseases in Nigeria has undergone significant transformation, with pioneering researchers laying the groundwork for modern advancements. Building upon the foundational work of Emeritus Professor S.S. Ajayi on the domestication of the African giant rat, Cetomis gambianus, and collaborative work with some scholars from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, hinging on the intricate relationship between wildlife conservation and public health. It is worthy of mentioning that wildlife health management is an integral part of veterinary training. I was aware early enough that conservation efforts are informed by a solid understanding of disease ecology. Pioneering contributions from 1970s to 1980s. Between the 1970s and early 1980s, researchers mostly from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, including Professors O.O. Dipeolu, G.O. Esuroso, O.A. Akimbade, O. Bamidele, O.M. Majaro, B.O. Ikede, S. Faladi, and others made groundbreaking contributions to the study of wildlife diseases, vector-borne infections, and their public health implications. For instance, Ikede, Faladi, and Golden 1976 documented an anthrax outbreak in captive carnivores. Dipeolu 1974, 1975, 1976 reported parasitic infections in zoo animals and role of biting flies in disease transmission. Falade and Drojayi 1976 isolated Salmonella serotypes from captive wild animals in Nigeria for the first time. Bamidele and Oguriade 1980 examined hermit infections in captive animals and the risk of cross-infections. Similarly, Akimbade and Dipeolu 1981 identified bacteria and parasitic infections in house rats, Ratus in Ibadan, emphasizing the zoonotic threats posed by urban rodent populations, shaping the future of wildlife research. These early contributions laid the foundation for understanding the interconnection between wildlife health, biodiversity, and public health, highlighting the need for integrated wildlife management strategies. While initial research depended heavily on direct sampling from wildlife, recent advancements have embraced non-invasive techniques to assess health and ecology of wildlife most importantly when working on vulnerable and threatened populations of wildlife. Vice Chancellor, sir. Methods such as the analysis of fecal droppings, footprints, observation, sound analysis, urine analysis, hair feather analysis, infrared thermography, computer vision and machine learning, and other trace evidence are now employed to monitor disease prevalence, assess population dynamics, and track habitat use in both conservation areas and the wild as they minimize disturbance. My contributions to knowledge. Vice Chancellor, sir. As a preamble, population census of wild animals can be taken by using direct or indirect methods. Specifically, the indirect method engages some indices that are pointers to the presence of specific animals in an ecosystem. Some of them include footprints, scats, nests, feathers, Omonona 2024, old skin of snakes, and exoskeletons of arthropods that undergo ecdysis, sounds made by different animals, scent of animals, feeding patterns, and so on. Distinctively, footprints provide the most detailed information on the identity, movements, and activities of animals, Omonona 2024. They offer a valuable introduction to the art of tracking, which might otherwise prove inaccessible to the inexperienced naturalist. Wildlife footprint is a track or mark left by feet or limbs of wildlife species on their natural habitat or domestication confinement. Just like animals, humans also leave tracks on the sand of time through their actions or activities and wanton use of natural resources. Some of these actions have put humanity into deep environmental crisis, destroyed, degraded, and polluted Earth's natural habitats, as well as negatively affecting the conservation status of biological species. This is to say that nearly all species have felt the footprints, that is, the influence of the dominant species, Homo sapiens. Vice Chancellor, sir. Permit me at this juncture to share with you and this distinguished audience my contributions to the body of scientific knowledge. These contributions span 4 key areas of my research focus, namely A. Impacts of pathogens on wildlife health and their public health implications. B. Implications of widespread exposures of wildlife to chemical toxicants. C. Use of synthetic and organic therapeutics in the treatment of infections. And D. Biodiversity conservation and wildlife trade impacts and ethical considerations. Studies on wildlife health, parasites, pathogens, and diseases. It is pertinent to know that wildlife is very essential in maintaining crucial ecosystem services. These species provide ecosystem services which play significant roles in maintaining health and functioning ecosystems that are of immense benefit to humans. Omonona Iodele 2011. Unfortunately, the disappearance of some of these species has been attributed to deadly or infectious pathogens which are of ecological and global health importance. Since humans and animals share the same ecosystem, it is expedient to know that parasites, pathogens, and diseases have evolved over time with animal and human populations. Vice Chancellor, sir. Over the years, my research efforts have explored pathogens as well as parasites in relation to wildlife health, and it should be worthwhile to share some with you and this amazing audience. Just as we know, the interaction of wildlife and humans may serve as an interface for disease transmission. This may eventually represent the intermediate probable allowance of cross-species transmission of zoonotic diseases. Based on the premise that very few data exist in the literature as regards the role of squirrels in the epidemiology of leptospirosis, especially in developing countries like Nigeria. Omonona et al. 2022 examined the level of awareness and perception of the University of Ibadan campus residents on squirrels as it relates to human transmission of leptospirosis. We found that 58.8% of the respondents did not know leptospirosis is a common zoonotic disease, while 51.0% are not aware of some of the symptoms of leptospirosis as shown on table 1. We equally noted a possible but weak correlation between educational status and perception of leptospirosis. These findings reiterate the importance of education and behavioral health interventions to improve knowledge and perception about leptospirosis and wildlife diseases generally. Hence, there is need for proper education as regards squirrels being potential carriers of leptospiral bacteria, and this should be done in such a way that residents do not attack or aim at eradicating squirrels. Vice Chancellor, sir. Diseases are one of many factors that threaten the existence of wild animals, some of which are infectious parasitic diseases. Parasites play an important role as one of the regulating mechanisms of population dynamics for species within an ecosystem. Ajibade, Ayodele, Agbede, and Omonona 2008. This implies that this parasite may affect hosts at the individual, population or community level. Omonona et al. 2014 here. Most free-living organisms harbor parasites of several species, which can adversely affect their health, fecundity, foraging, and consequently modify host behavior. Hence, the potential determinants of parasite distribution in a specific host population have been grouped into 3 factors. A, host individual factors such as age, sex, body size, diet. B, host population factors such as abundance, range, and migration. And C, environmental factors, habitat. The interactions between these different types of factors modulate parasite abundance in a given host population. More importantly, the zoonotic potential of this parasite cannot be undermined because the majority of zoonotic parasites of humans have been known to emanate from wildlife parasites. The human-wildlife interface therefore enables cross-transmission of parasites vis-a-vis the consumptive and non-consumptive utilization of wildlife. Figure here. Vice Chancellor, sir, I have been privileged to investigate the occurrence and prevalence of parasites across different classes of wildlife species. In amphibians, Omonona et al. 2011 determined blood parasites of common frogs in some parts of Ibadan City, southwestern Nigeria, particularly Moniya area of Ibadan and University of Ibadan Fish Farm. From this study, hemoflagellate from the genus Trypanosoma was identified with different morphological forms which are attributed to Trypanosoma rotatorium complex, while prevalence of infection in the 2 study sites were estimated at 32.8 and 29.3% respectively. Table here. The slight differences in the prevalence of blood parasites may be due to differences in environmental conditions, nutritional patterns, and their niche in each of the 2 locations. In reptiles, Omonona et al. 2016 identified prevalent gastrointestinal parasites in wild-caught snakes around Kainji Lake National Park, Niger State, and reported high parasitic burden. Coprological examination showed that 41.7% of the snakes were infected with a single parasite, while 25.0% had multiple infections as shown in Table 2. Calycephalus species, Pentastomus species, Strongyloides species, and Hymenolus species were among the parasites identified from this study. The observed parasites in the examined snake population were highly relevant, as some of the parasites were not only zoonotic, but could also endanger snakes in the wild. Additionally, in 9 monitor lizard, Varanus niloticus, Strongyloides species was the most prevalent of the gastrointestinal tract parasites, while Hemoproteus species had the highest prevalence, 42.5% of hemoparasites. Omonona et al. 2019 here. These findings assert that parasitic burden in wildlife species is becoming a major concern in human-wildlife interface. In avians, Omonona et al. 2014b examined the prevalence of the different ectoparasites and endoparasites of cattle egress, Bobocos ibis, captured within Ibadan metropolis. The findings from this study showed that Menopon galile was the only ectoparasite seen with a prevalence of 52.5%, while endoparasites identified were Ascarida galli, Enterarchis species, Trichostrongalus tenus, Fascioloides magna, and Syngamus strica. Hemoproteus species was the most prevalent hemoparasite, while Plasmodium species had the least prevalence as shown in Table 3. The findings from the study show significantly higher risk of co-infection of the different types of parasites and the possible role of cattle egress in the transmission of the parasites to domestic poultry and to human populations. Furthermore, the occurrence of Enterarchis gallinarum and Ascarida galli in village river birds, Plossus cucullatus, indicated that implication in causing parasitic infection in birds, Omonona et al. 2015 here. The 16.67 prevalence of the nematode ova observed in this study is still a reportable finding due to the significant health risk it poses to other wild and domestic birds. Omonona et al. 2017 investigated the occurrence as well as prevalence of parasites in African money dove, Streptopelia decipens, and observed endoparasite Capillaria species, Ascarida species, Emera species, and other parasites in 50% of the birds, while 64% were positive for various hemoparasites such as Plasmodium as shown in Table 4. Finally, in mammals, investigation of gastrointestinal parasites of domesticated grasshoppers Trironomis swinderanus across southwestern Nigeria identified 9 species of nematodes, 1 species of cestode, and 1 a protozoan parasite, Omonona 2011, as shown in Table 5. These evidences show that the health of captive grasshoppers and other wildlife can no longer be taken for granted. As promising as micro-livestock integration stands, emethosis in grasshoppers may threaten the practicability of production and availability of bushmeat to the generality of the populace. Also, Omonona et al. 2019b screened Walters Dicas Philanthropa walteri for gastrointestinal parasite in Ondo State, identifying 7 genera of endemic parasites, including 2 trematodes, fasciolar species, paraphystomus species, and 5 nematodes as shown in figure 1. Vice Chancellor, sir. Gastrointestinal parasites of zoonotic importance were identified from the samples of gastrointestinal tracts collected from live bushmeat markets across the country. These parasites have public health implications as they could be transmitted to humans by consuming raw or undercooked bushmeat. This is a note of warning to those that cherish Eronbe. Ecotoxicological studies and investigations. The field of ecotoxicology, particularly as related to the area of wildlife toxicology, continues to be a rapidly developing discipline of wildlife and environmental management. Omonona et al. 2014d. Being a scientific discipline, it coalesces the methods of ecology and toxicology in assessing the impact of toxins and especially contaminants on the environment. The effects of xenobiotics or anthropogenic chemicals on ecosystems are varying echelons of biological organization from the molecular and cellular level to the entire ecosystem is equally within the purview of ecotoxicological investigations. Adetuga, Omonona, and Jubilee 2020. It is pertinent to know that human activities have been identified as the major source of these contaminants, which are of high concern and ubiquitously distributed throughout the environmental matrices. The patterns of exposure to environmental contaminants can only be precisely interpreted with an analytical coverage of all relevant xenobiotics and trace elements. In lieu of this, investigations on the impact of toxins, contaminants as a biomarker of exposure, biomarker of effect, and biomarker of susceptibility has been a top priority for me in this research discipline. Adetuga, Omonona, Kori, Adigun, and Adesun 2025. Vice Chancellor, sir. Environmental contamination is one of the most devastating ecological crises facing the world today, especially in developing countries where it is more severe and critical, considering the huge amount of pollution load elicited from anthropogenic activities. Environmental contaminants have been a concern to ecosystem health due to their relatively high concentrations and ability to bioaccumulate and biomagnify within the biota. Omonona et al. 2014d. For this inaugural lecture, the environmental contaminants I will be focusing on are heavy metals, from which, by the grace of God, I have been privileged to publish numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals. Studies on heavy metals. Heavy metal refers to any metallic element that has a relatively high density and may be toxic even at low concentration, being old 2005. They are mostly naturally occurring elements whose levels in different environments differ as a consequence of diverse anthropogenic activities. Vice Chancellor, sir, the footprint of man, also referred to as anthropogenic activities, have contributed more to the concentrations of these heavy metals within the different environmental matrix, and this poses a severe threat to biodiversity conservation. Moreover, the existence of these metals in biological species and in different echelons of the ecosystem, even at low levels, is not desirable, as they may have toxic effects. Since most of our biological diversity are found within the in-situ conservation areas, that is the natural habitat, I decided to assess the heavy metal contamination profile of our protected areas in Nigeria using a method of contamination assessment which is non-invasive. I have been able to make documentations for 3 national parks, Odoyo, Kainji Lake, and Okomu National Parks, and a forest reserve, Omo Forest Reserve, as shown in figure B. While efforts are ongoing to cover the remaining protected areas, as shown on table 6B, figure C and D, even though the problem of insecurity has been challenging. Vice Chancellor, sir, the existence of these chemical toxicants, especially in concentrations above the maximum standard permissible limits, represents a high level of risk to the entire biota. For instance, in an evaluation of heavy metal concentration in Kainji Lake National Park, Omonona et al. 2019 reported that heavy metals analyzed, except zinc, were found to be higher than the WHO guidelines for drinking water, and this implies that the sampled water may not be potable or safe for drinking, as shown in table 7. Furthermore, even though relative low levels of metals were observed in the sampled fecal droppings from the park, this still indicated exposure to heavy metals by the wild animals, as shown in table 8. As such, the trend of heavy metal levels and influence of seasonal variation observed in this study gave an insight into the contamination of studied ecosystem. In Okomu National Park, similar findings were observed with plausible implication on wildlife health. The mean values of heavy metals in the water samples revealed that all the heavy metals analyzed, except copper and zinc, were above the WHO guidelines for drinking water, as shown in table 9. while the level of cadmium in the soil samples was higher than the comparable maximum allowable limit. Also, the mean values of all the analyzed heavy metals except zinc in the sample plant species were equally above the comparable permissible limit, with significant seasonal variation being observed in the concentration of heavy metals as shown in table 10. Hence, the need for continuous monitoring of heavy metal deposition as well as their routes of exposure in the park is very sacrosanct. Omonona et al. 2020a. In Inaugural National Park, we investigated heavy metal levels across 4 seasons of sampling and observed that all the heavy metals except copper and zinc were above the comparable permissible limits in the water samples as shown in table 11. And statistical differences were noted in the values of the analyzed heavy metals across the 4 seasons of sampling. Also, in the plant species sampled from the park, chromium during the wet season of 2017, cadmium and iron during the wet season were above the comparable permissible limits as shown on table 12. Hence, due to the nature of heavy metals, they can biomagnify along the food chain, thereby causing health implications and effects even to humans who sit at the echelon of the food chain. In Omo Forest Reserve, which is a slit from the bigger Shasha Forest Reserve that was constituted in 1925, we investigated heavy metals in soil and water samples across 2 seasons of sampling as shown in tables 13 and 14. We observed more heavy metal contamination during the wet season, with heavy metals being above the comparable permissible limits. Omonona et al. 2019d. The level of heavy metal concentration observed in the soil and water samples may be attributed to the dominant anthropogenic activities such as sawmill industry, massive logging, heavy-duty vehicular movement, and farming being carried out within and around the study area. Hence, it is sacrosanct, the footprint of man, that is anthropogenic activities, that elicit these metals be checked so as to minimize implicative effect on the entire biota. Vice Chancellor, sir, I would like to call attention to the fact that most of our protected areas in Nigeria and other African countries have enclaves and neighboring human communities that make use of the same water bodies of water that traverse these protected areas. So whatever contaminants that are present in this water eventually get to the humans inhabiting those enclaves and the adjoining human communities to the protected areas. Studies on treatment of infections. Vice Chancellor, sir. Wild animal species can be exposed to varying degrees of infections or diseases, even though they are generally regarded as natural reservoirs. In my academic journey at the University of Ibadan, I've extensively investigated the use of synthetic and organic therapeutics in the treatment of infections, as well as the effect of this treatment on the blood profile of wild animals. I'm privileged to share a few of these findings with you and this distinguished audience. Among them is a study where I compared the therapeutic effect of 2 trypanosides on captive reared grasscutters, Trichonomis sundaranus, experimentally challenged with Trypanosoma brucei. Rodents, including grasscutters, also known as carers, generally are susceptible to the Stercorarian trypanosomes, and T. brucei has been known to have distinguishing morphology and longer incubation period. The infected grasscutters were treated with 2 brands of trypanocidal drugs, pantecin and berenin, and administered intramuscularly, Omonona et al. 2013. The study revealed that the trypanosides showed different efficacies, even though there was 85% mortality across the groups. The berenin treated group showed signs of recovery clinically and hematologically post-treatment, significantly than the pantecin treated group as shown in tables 15 and 16. The findings from this study can be used as indices in the evaluation of dietary quality and health clinical status of captive reared grasscutters. Furthermore, the endemicity of trypanosomiasis, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, is due to the abundance of the vector, fly, host, and parasite factors, Omonona et al. 2013, Agbola Ayodele, Omonona and Adetuka 2017. Our study at Omonona National Park revealed that a total number of 136 glossina belonging to 4 species were captured with 77.9% captured during the dry season, while 22.1% were captured during the wet season. Also, out of the 136 flies captured, 51.5% were female, while 48.5% were male, as shown in table 17 and figure 2, Omonona et al. 2020b. This study revealed 2 species of trypanosome, Trypanosoma brucei and Trypanosoma vivax, which showed that there was an active transmission of these trypanosomes in the study area as shown in table 18. Though previous study reported the presence of T. grayi, T. congolense, and T. vivax from captured tsetse flies, Weber et al. 2019. Studies on biodiversity conservation and wildlife trade impacts. Vice Chancellor, sir. The primary threats encountered from successful conservation of biodiversity are frequently born out of habitat loss and non-stop exploitation of flora and fauna species. Biodiversity is a variety of life forms, and the footprint of man vis-a-vis anthropogenic activities have contributed significantly towards its decline through indiscriminate and unsustainable utilization of wild animals and plants for different purposes that are either consumptive or non-consumptive. These activities, including the unregulated hunting, consumption, and wildlife trade, have been linked to the rise in emerging infectious diseases, Karesh and Noble 2009, that may be zoonotic and can be of public health concern, Omonona et al. 2018a. This assertion emanates from the fact that increased contact or exposure to wildlife habitat, blood, fur, and saliva is not to increase the probability of disease transmission between animals and humans. As such, wildlife hunters, traders, and owners of wildlife pets have been implicated in the transmission of zoonosis. On that note, I would like to share some of my contributions to knowledge in this area of research interest. Hunting has been identified as one of the biggest threats to wildlife fauna resources in the world, with many African rural communities relying on bushmeat as an economic as well as cultural component of their livelihoods. Hence, I try to understand the drivers of bushmeat hunting and perception of zoonosis among wildlife hunters and traders around Odo National Park, Omonona et al. 2018a, and Oba Hill Forest Reserve, Omonona et al. 2018b, as shown on tables 19 and 20. It is important to note that the level of awareness of zoonotic diseases significantly influences the extent of wildlife trading around Odo National Park. In contrast, around Oba Hill Forest Reserve, factors such as level of education, frequency of contact with wild animals, intensity of wildlife trading, and demand for bushmeat all played key roles in driving bushmeat hunting activities. Despite these factors, a generally low level of awareness and perception of zoonotic diseases was observed among wildlife hunters and traders in both study areas. The wildlife market or trade interface remains a vital platform for the transmission of diseases of zoonotic potential without boundaries, Omonona et al. 2020c. For instance, some wildlife traders get their stocks, as shown on page B, from outside the country. The procurement and subsequent transportation of these stocks may enhance transboundary spread of diseases, since wildlife has historically been an important source of infectious diseases transmissible to humans. Diseases of wildlife origin can therefore impact the conservation of biodiversity, including domestic animals and public health, thereby affecting a nation's economy, COCA 2019. Consequently, a major focus of my research is the exploration of market practices and biosurveillance as at the animal-human interface, particularly between wildlife and wildlife traders, with the aim of identifying potential zoonotic diseases. This focus is closely tied to issues of wildlife and environmental health, as well as biodiversity conservation. In this regard, the work of the Human Wildlife Health Group, which I am privileged to convene and lead as the principal investigator, has been instrumental. The group has made significant strides in sensitizing wildlife traders about the risks associated with contact with wild animals, identifying commonly encountered diseases, tracing transmission routes, and assessing patterns of exposure to zoonotic infections. Adebanjo, Ademola, Adetuga, Omonona, and Omonona 2025 investigated the willingness of individuals actively engaged in the wildlife trade to adopt alternative livelihoods. The findings revealed that most wildlife traders were reluctant to pursue other income-generating activities. This reluctance was influenced by several factors, including long-standing family traditions, the perceived sufficiency of income derived from wildlife trading, and the age of the traders, among others. Most of these wildlife traders earned handsomely. As far back as 2019, 10 feathers of parrot cost 5,000 naira, and they find the income substantial, hence they were willing to get involved in other income-earning activities. Summary and conclusion. Vice Chancellor, sir. This lecture has invariably provided the historical review of research works on wildlife pathogens in Nigeria before I came on board. It has also given an expose on some of my works on wildlife and environmental health, ecotoxicology, as well as biodiversity conservation in Nigeria. I have been able to identify anthropogenic activities, human desires, and wants as a major culprit in the area of factors affecting biodiversity conservation. All this leaves staggering footprints on the wild flora and fauna with consequential echoing effect on their population and man's existence. Recommendations. To begin with, I commend the University of Ibadan's current administration for its commitment to environmental protection and biodiversity conservation. The tree planting initiative spanning 15 hectares around the Oba Dam axis is a notable achievement, demonstrating a proactive approach to preserving the ecosystem. The relocation of farmers from the Oba Dam watershed was also a strategic move to prevent pollution and mitigate over-citation of the dam. A round of applause for the university administration. But permit me to use our Yoruba adage which says, Ile Latin question already, meaning charity begins at home. And as our forebears usually say, Oku ni bonro, there is still more to be done. To further promote biodiversity conservation, I recommend that wanton and unsustainable anthropogenic activities, hitherto referred to in this lecture as footprints, should be discouraged on the university campus to forestall species habitat degradation, while efforts to promote species subsistence should be encouraged. Secondly, the government should promulgate laws with stringent sanctions to curtail the activities of those who are illegally exploiting our biodiversity in this country. During my visit to Tanzania in 2009, I had the opportunity to visit some conservancies. Conservancies are pockets of forests under the management of communities. The process of ecotourism from such conservancies are plowed into the development of those local communities. This brilliant arrangement ensures that the local communities are always ready to protect those conservancies with their lives. More funding should therefore be allocated to the management of our protected areas, and all necessary incentives should be given to the players in the tourism industry to boost the revenue generation from this sector. Thirdly, a 2019 wildlife market survey conducted by the Iman Wildlife Health Group revealed the alarming porosity of Nigeria's ports of entry, enabling rampant wildlife trafficking. This illicit trade is thriving due to inadequate enforcement structures, allowing perpetrators to brazenly disregard laws and regulations. Corruption, bribery, and insecurity further exacerbate the issue, with powerful individuals involved in wildlife trading often bribing law enforcement officials to turn a blind eye. This threatens Nigeria's natural resources and biodiversity, necessitating urgent government intervention at both national and state levels to prevent over-exploitation and extinction. Effective measures are crucial to address these challenges and protect Nigeria's wildlife heritage. The government must take decisive action to strengthen enforcement structures and combat corruption to safeguard the country's natural resources. Also, there is a need to intensify efforts on wildlife disease surveillance. Monitoring of health of wildlife populations can help in early detection and tracking of disease outbreaks, allowing for early interventions and preventions. Lastly, the government should intensify efforts to eradicate terrorism and insecurity in the country, which is currently causing serious havoc to the in-situ conservation of our natural resources. Terrorism, insecurity, and the incursion of terrorists into our national parks and game reserves have hindered conservation efforts, research works, and resulted in loss of lives of some officers of Nigeria's National Park Service over the years. Acknowledgments. I give all the praise and worship to the immortal, invisible, the only wise, the only true God, and my Redeemer. Trillions of tongues are not enough to appreciate my God for his faithfulness and mercy over my life. If it were not for the Almighty God, I would have been consumed by the enemy long ago. It is by God's special grace that I'm able to get to this stage in my career. I appreciate the sacrificial love and investment of my parents, Pa Jacob Olaniyi Olaniyo and Mama Deborah Adeti Ejide Olaniyo, both of blessed memory. My heartfelt gratitude to my siblings and their spouses for the wonderful roles each played in my life. Mr. Tunde and Mrs. Titi Odeomi, Mrs. Ruth Agnola, Kabiyesi His Royal Majesty Pastor Michael Folarin Fabumi and Olori Pastor Lydia Fabumi, Dr. Benga and Mrs. Lav Olaniyo, Professor David Olaniyo of blessed memory, Pastor Kade and Pastor Esther Ayeni, Mr. Tunde and Mrs. Michelle Olaniyo, and my younger brother and his spouse, Dr. Shegun and Mrs. Kemi Olaniyo. I appreciate Baba and the Reverend Canon Emmanuel Ajayi Omonona and Mama Joanna Abiodun Omonona, both of blessed memory, and the entire members of the Omonona clan of Otu, Kaba in Kogi State for accepting me into the family. Special thanks goes to all my extended family members and in-laws present here today. I'm deeply grateful to the Vice Chancellor of this great university, Professor K.O. Adibwale, for accepting the nomination of the Dean of my faculty to present this 588th inaugural lecture. I appreciate the Dean of the Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources, Professor Adejoke Akinyele, for nominating me to present this inaugural lecture on behalf of our faculty. I'm grateful to the Most High God for the gift of wonderful brothers like Pastor Tony Fashuno, Professor Isaiah Ademola, Professor Taiwo Jeremiah, Pastor Cornelius Domogaji, that God used at different times to play pivotal roles in my life. Families are special institutions from God, whether the ones by blood or by the Spirit. I'm grateful to God for planting me in this beautiful family, and I deeply appreciate all the members of God's family to which I belong. I appreciate the members of the Chapel of the Resurrection, University of Ibadan, under the leadership of Venerable Dr. Vio Oladele and his assistants, the Venerable T.P. Falusi and the Very Reverend S.I. Daniel. I also appreciate all the members of the Evangelism Unit of the Chapel of the Resurrection that are here present. I deeply appreciate all the members of the Bible Study Fellowship International under the guidance of Mrs. Bosse Emmanuel. I want to sincerely thank all my teachers from primary school to tertiary institution. Your hard work has made me what I am today. I'm most grateful to Mama Chief, Mrs. Louisa O. Oyelese of Blessed Memory, who was my secondary school teacher. I acknowledge all my lecturers in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University of Ibadan. Most importantly, Dr. A.K. Olaifa, my undergraduate project supervisor, late Dr. E.A. Okewale, my master's project supervisor, late Professor S. Agbede, my PhD co-supervisor, and other colleagues from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University of Ibadan. I acknowledge all the members of class of 1994 graduating sets from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University of Ibadan. I especially acknowledge my classmates in primary and secondary schools present here today. God bless you all. I appreciate all my friends and family friends here seated. I would not like to mention any names specifically so that I do not end up offending anyone. Thank you all for honoring me with your presence at this lecture. I appreciate the founding father of the defunct Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Management that has metamorphosed to the Department of Wildlife and Ecotourism Management and the Department of Aquaculture and Fisheries Management, Emeritus Professor S.S. Ajayi. I acknowledge the other two elder statements of the defunct Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Management, Professor E.O. Faturoti and Professor A.E. Falaye. Your contributions to my academic career did not go unnoticed. Worthy of note is my PhD supervisor, the ebullient Professor I.E. Ayodele, who was also the head of the department at the time I was employed in 1998. You are greatly appreciated, sir. All other colleagues that I worked with under the defunct Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Management are duly acknowledged. I appreciate all my colleagues and the non-teaching staff members of the department in the Department of Wildlife and Ecotourism Management. I'm grateful to God for the gift of men and women that stood by me during my tenure as the head of the Department of Wildlife and Ecotourism Management. Most importantly, all the coordinators, undergraduate, postgraduate, and practical year training program coordinator. I acknowledge all the members of staff, both academic and non-academic, under the Faculty of Renewable Natural Resources. I want to thank all my students, both past and present, especially my doctoral students. I appreciate all the members and most importantly, the past and the present executives of the University of Ibadan Biodiversity Conservation Club for keeping the vision alive and burning. I especially acknowledge Dr. Afasat Jago Jibril of Blessed Memory, who was a worthy research collaborator. I'm highly thankful to the three-man committee for this inaugural lecture, Dr. T.A. Jarikre, Dr. Eti Adetuga, Dr. O.O. Ola, for the way they rallied around me and their contributions to make this inaugural lecture a success. My appreciation also goes to Professor Hayo Ademola, Professor B.T. Omonona, and Dr. O.M. Koka for the quality proofreading of this manuscript. My special thanks goes to the coordinator and the entire members of the Organization of Women in Science in Developing World, University of Ibadan chapter. My special appreciation goes to Mr. Olatuji Mohammed Oladejo, Director, Ibadan University Press, for the excellent editorial work. Finally, I want to thank my darling husband, my crown, Professor Bolan Itaitosari Omonona, and our children, our stars, Eboluwa Ayoluamide Josephine, Oluwamaku Victor Olaoluamide, and Oluwatobiloba Emmanuel Oluwagbemiga for the love we share. You rock my world. I thank everyone who has made our time to be in attendance for this lecture. God bless you all. To the immortal, the invisible, the only wise God I sing. From my spirit to my soul, until my voice re-echoes, you are worthy of my worship, worthy of my praise. Halle, halle, hallelujah. Halle, halle, hallelujah. You are worthy of my worship, worthy of my praise. Vice Chancellor, sir.
Yeah.